I wasn't supposed to be in that room. That's the first thing you have to understand. Cadets from the Sioux, my people, the Suvith, we don't train with the shock divisions. We're logistics. We're supply chains and atmosphere balancing and the quiet math that keeps a fleet alive. Nobody puts a Suvith in a survival cohort. Our bones are hollow in the wrong places. We break. But I was on rotation as a records clerk that cycle, and the clerk's bench sits at the back of Hall 9, up on the little mezzanine where the light doesn't reach. And from there, you can see the whole training floor without anyone noticing you're watching. So I saw all of it, every second. I've told this story maybe 40 times since, at supply depots and in transit lounges, and once to a Kesh admiral who didn't believe a word of it until she checked the record herself. I'm telling it to you now the way I saw it. No embellishment. I don't need to embellish. The truth was already the strangest thing I've ever witnessed. Let me set it for you first. Hall 9 was the Endurance Certification Hall on Koryat Station, which orbits a dead star out past the third reach. The station was old. Everything on it hummed at a frequency that got into your teeth after a while, this low grinding note from the gravity plating that never quite synced. The air smelled like scorched mineral and the cleaning agent they used on the mats, which was supposed to be odorless and absolutely was not. Cold, too. They kept the certification halls cold on purpose. Something about baseline stress response. You'd walk in and your breath would fog and your skin would tighten up and you'd think, right, this is a place where they hurt you to see if you're worth keeping. The cohort that cycle was 42 cadets. I remember the exact number because I'd logged them all that morning, one by one, thumbprint and species and homeworld into the manifest. They were the usual mix, big ones mostly. You have to understand that a survival cohort self-selects for a certain kind of body. There were 9 Draven, all muscle and armor plating, the kind of species that evolved on a heavy world and never let you forget it. A cluster of Kesh, tall and reptilian and unbearably proud, who moved like they were doing you a favor by existing in your general direction. Some Vothan, some Grell, a pair of those silent crystalline ith who communicated in light pulses and unnerved everybody. And scattered through them, the mid-tier species, the ones who wouldn't win but wanted the certification on their record. And one human. Now, I'd never seen a human before that cycle, not in person. You heard about them, everyone did by then. Humans had been in the galactic community for 60 cycles at that point, long enough to have a reputation. But the reputation was mostly rumor and bar talk, and honestly most of us thought it was inflated. You know how these things go. One species does something impressive once, and suddenly there are 1,000 stories, each one bigger than the last. She was small. That was my first thought. Genuinely small, she came up to about the collarbone of the shortest Draven in the room, and next to the big one she looked like she'd wandered in from a different building entirely. Soft-looking. Humans have this soft outer covering, this skin, no plating, no scales, no chitin, nothing. You look at one and your instinct is to feel a little bad for them. Poor thing. So exposed. One good hit and surely that's the end of it. Her name, I had it in the manifest, was Cadet Anya Reyes. Homeworld, Earth, prior service, something the manifest listed only as civilian terrestrial, which meant nothing to me at the time. She was sitting on the floor when the others were standing. Not out of disrespect. She just folded herself down cross-legged while the rest stood at their rigid attention, and she was retying the fabric bindings on her feet with this look of total unbothered concentration, like the certification that was about to possibly kill her was a minor errand she'd get to in a moment. A Kesh cadet near her said something. I couldn't hear it from the mezzanine, but I saw his crest flare and I saw the cadets around him do that ripple of amusement. And I saw Anya Reyes look up at him with a small, pleasant, closed-mouth smile and then go right back to her bindings. She didn't answer him. She just smiled and looked away. I remember thinking, that one's going to wash out in the first hour, and she doesn't even know it yet. I have never in my life been so completely wrong about anything. The instructor's name was Vortashen. I need to spend a moment on him because you can't understand what happened without understanding what he was. Vortashen was a Draven, and not a young one. He'd survived the Meridian collapse. He'd walked out of the hollow sieve, which if you don't know your history was a containment failure that killed 9,000 and left survivors in the single digits. He had a burn scar that ran from the left ridge of his skull down under his collar, old and silvered, and he never explained it and nobody ever asked. He was the kind of instructor whose name got said quietly. When you drew Taschen for your certification, people gave you a look, a good luck look, the kind you give someone who's about to have a hard time. He came out onto the floor without any ceremony. Just walked out, and the whole hall snapped silent, 42 cadets going still at once, and he stood there and let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, and then he let it stretch a little longer. "Endurance certification," he said finally. His voice was low and it carried. "You think you know what that means, you don't." He walked the line as he talked, slow, looking at each of them. "Most of you will not certify. That's not cruelty. That's mathematics. This certification exists to identify the ones who can operate in conditions that would incapacitate a normal being, not tolerate, operate. There is a difference and most of you have never had to learn it." He stopped in front of a Draven, looked him up and down. "Strength doesn't certify. I've watched stronger than you fold." Moved on, stopped in front of the crystalline ith. "Endurance isn't just the body. I've watched tougher than you break in the mind and take the whole cohort down with them." Moved on. He got to Anya Reyes. He stopped. And I watched him look at her, this tiny soft creature, and I watched something move across his face. Not contempt, exactly. Taschen was too disciplined for contempt, but a kind of tired disappointment. Like someone had wasted his time by putting her on his floor. "You're the human," he said. "Yes, sir." "You understand what this hall is?" "I read the briefing, sir." "That's not what I asked." She looked up at him. And here's the thing, she wasn't afraid. I was close enough now, watching from above, to see her face clearly, and there was no fear in it. There was just this calm, and underneath the calm, faint, almost hidden, something that might have been amusement. "I understand what the hall is, sir," she said. Taschen held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he stepped back and addressed the whole cohort. "I'm going to read you the conditions," he said. "Listen carefully, I read them once. Now I have to explain the conditions, and I have to explain why the whole hall reacted the way it did. Because, if you're not familiar with certification standards, you'll miss the weight of it. The endurance halls could reproduce environmental conditions. That was the whole point of them. The floor, the walls, the air systems, all of it was engineered to generate stress environments so a cadet could be certified for deployment into hostile theaters. Vacuum-adjacent pressure, thermal extremes, atmospheric contamination, radiation bands, all of it dialed in, monitored, survivable if you were built for it, catastrophic if you weren't. Every cadet knew there were thresholds. Standard maximum survivable exposure for a mixed cohort was calibrated to protect the weakest species present. That's just how it worked. You didn't run conditions that would kill your cadets. The certification was about pushing to the edge of the survivable band and seeing who could still function. Vor Taschen pulled up the environmental manifest on the hall display, and he started reading. "Gravity fluctuation," he said. 0.4 standard to 2.6 standard variable, no warning. Murmurs, that was aggressive but not insane. Thermal band, -40 to +60 Celsius. He said it flatly. For the humans in the room, since there's one, that's your scale. For everyone else, it's cold enough to seize a Kesh and hot enough to blister a Vathan. More murmurs now. The Kesh cluster shifted uneasily. Atmospheric oxygen concentration variable between 6% and 40%. Trace contaminants introduced at random intervals. Particulate. Sulfuric. You'll cough, some of you will vomit, that's expected. The murmurs were getting louder. This was past aggressive. This was into the band where cadets got hurt. Pressure variance. Storm cycle simulation. Wind loads up to 100 kilometers per hour gusting, precipitation, ice. Somebody in the cohort, a grell I think, made a sound of open disbelief. Taschen kept reading. His voice never changed. Duration, 6 hours. No breaks. No water provided, you carry your own or you go without. Sleep deprivation baseline, you've been awake since the cycle start and I'm aware of it and that's the point. Illumination will fail at random intervals. You'll work in the dark. He set down the manifest. These, he said, are impossible conditions. That's not hyperbole. This exact configuration has a certification rate of 4%. I've run it 41 times. I've certified 11 cadets total across all of them. Some cohorts, nobody walks out certified. Some cohorts, people don't walk out at all, they get carried to medical, and they recover, and they never come back to this hall. He let that sit. I'm telling you this so you can withdraw, right now. Withdrawal is not failure. There is no mark on your record for recognizing that a thing is beyond you. The mark on your record is for staying in a thing that's beyond you and having to be dragged out of it. That mark follows you. So. He looked across all of them. The door is behind you. It's open for the next 60 seconds. If you're not built for this, and most of you aren't, walk through it now. No one will remember you did. And the hall was silent. I watched from the mezzanine and I watched the cohort do the terrible arithmetic. You could see it moving through them. You could see the ones who'd come in cocky suddenly recalculating. A Vothan near the back turned and walked out, just turned and left. No drama, and Tashin gave a small nod as he passed, an actual nod of respect. 2 Grell followed. Then a Kesh, which surprised me because Kesh pride usually won't let them. 4 gone, 38 left. And in the middle of all that, down on the floor, Anya Reyes finished tying her foot bindings. She stood up. She rolled her shoulders. She looked for all the world like someone getting ready for a workout they'd done 100 times before. And she was smiling. Not a big smile, not a smug one, just this small, private, almost fond little smile, like Tashin had said something that reminded her of home. Tashin saw it, of course he saw everything. Something funny, cadet. And this is the moment. This is the whole story, really. Everything else is just before and after this. So let me tell it exactly. Anya Reyes looked up at the environmental manifest still glowing on the display. -40 to 60. 6% oxygen, 100-kilometer winds, ice, 6 hours in the dark. And she said, and I heard it clear as anything, because the hall was dead silent, and her voice carried up to the mezzanine like she'd meant it to. Sorry, sir, it's just, and the smile got a little wider, a little more real, that's just Earth on a Monday. Nobody laughed. I want to be clear about that, because when I tell this story people always assume the cohort laughed, like it was a joke and she was the comic relief. They didn't laugh, because it didn't land like a joke. It landed like a fact, stated by someone who had no reason to lie and no idea she was saying anything remarkable. The Kesh who'd mocked her earlier, his crest went flat. That's a Kesh tell. That's what they do when something recalibrates their whole understanding of a situation. And Vortashin, the man who'd survived the hollow sieve, who'd read those conditions in a flat, dead voice 41 times, Vortashin went very, very still. Explain that, he said. She hadn't meant it as a challenge. I understood that later. She'd said it the way you'd say anything true and unremarkable, and now the whole room was looking at her, and she seemed genuinely a little embarrassed to have to justify it. I didn't mean anything by it, sir, she said. The conditions, they're rough. I'm not saying they're not rough. I'm just saying they're not, she searched for the word. They're not unfamiliar. -40, Tashin said. Yeah, that's northern winter, sir. Where I trained, it got colder than that. We had a thing where you'd throw a cup of hot water into the air and it'd freeze before it hit the ground. That was a fun morning, actually. We did drills in it. 60 positive. Summer. Different part of the planet, obviously, you don't get both in one day usually, but she tilted her head considering, sometimes you do. The place I did my heat certification, ground temperature got past 70. You had to keep moving or your feet cooked. We joked that the rocks were the real instructors. Somebody in the cohort made a small sound, not a laugh, Something more like alarm. 6% oxygen, Tashin said. Altitude, Anya said immediately, and now she was warming up. Now she was on comfortable ground, you could see it. That's just altitude, sir. My grandmother lived at an elevation where the air was about that. Not for training, she just lived there. Whole towns, people going about their day, having bobbies, carrying groceries up hills. You acclimatize. First few days you feel like you're dying, and then your blood changes and you're fine. Humans do that. We just reroute. There's a whole population back home that's basically built for 6%. They run up mountains for fun. Tashin was quiet. The wind and ice, that's just weather, sir. The dark is just night. The no water provided thing, and here she actually laughed. A short, surprised laugh, like she'd only just registered it. Sir, no offense, but where I'm from, bring your own water isn't a hardship condition. That's just leaving the house. The hall was so silent, I could hear the gravity plating grinding. 6 hours, Tashin said. It was almost a question now. Sir, my longest field exercise was 9 days. She said it gently, like she was worried about embarrassing him. 6 hours is, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. 6 hours is when you'd stop for lunch. I have replayed that exchange in my head more times than I can count, and every time I notice something new about it. But the thing I noticed most, that first time, watching from the dark of the mezzanine, was that she wasn't bragging. That's what got me. That's what got everyone. If she'd been puffed up about it, if she'd been performing, the cohort would have hated her and Tashin would have shut her down and it would have been forgettable. Cadets bluster all the time. You learn to ignore it. But Anya Reyes wasn't blustering. She was, if anything, apologetic. She kept softening it, kept saying no offense and I don't mean anything by it, because she'd realized slowly that the thing she thought was ordinary was landing in this room like a series of small detonations. She was a person from a hard place, describing her home, and only now understanding, you could watch it happen on her face, that everyone else in the room considered her home to be a death sentence. And the reason it landed so hard is this, and you have to understand galactic biology to feel the full weight of it. Most species evolved on stable worlds. That's not an insult, it's just how it works. Life is easier to get started on a stable world, and once it's started it optimizes for the conditions it's in. The Kesh homeworld has a temperature variance of maybe 8 degrees across a whole year. The Draven come from a heavy world, yes, brutal gravity, but it's consistent brutal gravity, the same crushing weight every single day, and they built bodies to match it and then never had to adapt again. Stability breeds specialists. You get very, very good at one thing. Earth is not stable. I didn't know that then. Almost nobody in the galaxy did back then. We thought of Earth as just another garden world, temperate, blue, unremarkable. What we didn't understand, what took the galaxy an embarrassingly long time to understand, is that Earth is a chaos world. It's got an axial tilt that throws the whole planet through violent seasonal extremes. It's got a single moon large enough to torque the oceans around twice a day. It's got tectonic plates that grind and split and remake the surface. It's got a weather system driven by the rotation of the planet itself, spawning storms the size of continents. Ice ages, heat waves, floods, droughts, volcanic winters. The whole history of the place is one long emergency. And humans didn't evolve despite that. They evolved into it. They're not specialists. They're the opposite of specialists. They are, and I mean this precisely, a species optimized for instability, for change with no warning, for conditions that shift under your feet. A human body doesn't have one operating environment. It has a range, a huge and frankly obscene range, and inside that range it just adapts, reroutes, changes its own blood chemistry, grows new tolerances, sweats to cool, shivers to warm, thickens, thins, acclimatizes, endures. Vortashen's impossible conditions. The 4% certification rate configuration, the one that carried cadets out on stretchers, was a menu of extremes. And to Anya Reyes it read like a description of Tuesday. Tashin didn't say anything for a long moment. And I have to tell you, watching an instructor like Tashin have to recalculate in real time is not a thing you see often. Instructors like him do not get surprised. Getting surprised is a thing they train out of themselves. Surprise gets you killed. And here he was, visibly, undeniably, revising. Finally he said, "The conditions stand." "Yes, sir, of course, sir. I wasn't asking you to change them." "No," he said, "you weren't." And there was something almost like respect in it. "Cohort, prep, we begin in 10. And the cadets moved to prep, and I sat up on the mezzanine with my records clerk stylus frozen in my hand, and I thought, I have to see this. Whatever this is, I have to watch every second. I did. Here's what I saw. The first hour was thermal. They started cold. Tashin dropped the hall to -20 and let it sit there, and then he started pushing it lower, and I watched the cohort react. The Kesh went first, predictably. Reptilian metabolism. Cold is the Kesh nightmare. Their whole system slows, their thoughts slow, they get sluggish and stupid, and eventually they just stop. 2 of them were struggling inside 20 minutes, moving like they were underwater. A monitor drone hovered near each, ready to pull them if their core temp crossed the line. The Draven handled the cold better, big thermal mass. That heavy world muscle holds heat. But the cold wasn't really their problem. Their problem was coming, and it was going to be the swings. And Anya Reyes. She was cold. I want to be honest about that because the story sometimes gets told like she felt nothing, like she was some kind of machine, and that's not right, and it's actually less impressive than the truth. She was cold. She was shivering. Her skin had gone pale and blotchy, and her lips had a bluish cast, and she was clearly, visibly, uncomfortable. But she was working. That's the thing Tashin had said, right at the start, the thing nobody understood until now. Not tolerate, operate. The difference between a being that endures a condition and a being that keeps functioning inside it. Anya was shivering, and shivering, I learned later, is itself a human adaptation, an automatic system that generates heat through muscle activity, the body solving its own problem without being asked, and while she shivered she was moving through the certification tasks. There were tasks I should have mentioned. The cohort wasn't just standing there surviving. They had to complete objectives. Move a load from one side of the hall to the other, assemble a mechanism, solve a sequence. The whole point was function under stress. The Kesh had stopped doing tasks. They were just surviving now, all their resources going to staying alive. Anya was still doing tasks, slower than she probably would in comfort, hands clumsy with cold, but doing them. And here's the small human detail I never forgot. While she worked, she was talking. Quietly. To herself, or maybe to the cadet nearest her, a young Draven who was holding up okay but rattled. She was talking him through it. "Keep your hands moving," I heard her say. "Don't stop moving them. You stop, they seize up, then you can't work. Little movements. Wiggle your fingers, there you go, you're okay. Cold won't kill you this fast. It feels like it will. It won't, keep working." The Draven cadet, twice her size, from a world that would flatten her, was taking survival advice from the smallest, softest creature in the room. And she was right, that's the thing. Everything she said was right. Then Tashin brought the heat. He didn't ease it up. That was the cruelty of the swing. The manifest had said variable, no warning, and he meant it. The hall went from -20 and dropping to a hard climb, up through 0, up past 20, up toward the positive band, fast, faster than anything natural. This is where you'd think the cold-adapted species would get relief and the story would even out. It didn't work that way. The swing itself was the weapon. A body that spent an hour fighting to stay warm, that's dumped all its resources into heat generation, does not pivot cleanly to shedding heat. The Kesh who'd been seizing up in the cold now had the opposite problem and no ability to switch. Their systems couldn't turn on the dime the swing demanded. The Draven suffered here. Their thermal mass, the thing that saved them in the cold, now cooked them. All that muscle holding all that heat with no efficient way to dump it. One of the big ones went down, just folded, dropped a knee, and the monitor drone was on him instantly, and 2 medical staff came out and carried him off the floor. He was breathing. He'd recover, but he was done. I looked for Anya. She had stopped working. For a second my heart went into my throat. I thought, there it is. She's finally hit her wall, but then I understood what she was doing. She was sweating. I'd never seen it before. I didn't even know what it was. This sheen coming up all over her exposed skin, and she'd stripped off the outer layer of her cadet wrap to expose more of it, and she was standing there almost still, breathing slow, letting it happen. Sweat, the human cooling system. They leak water through their skin and let it evaporate, and it pulls the heat right out of them. And it is, I learned this later, I looked it up. I couldn't stop looking things up after that day. It is one of the most effective cooling systems in the known galaxy. Humans can shed heat faster than almost anything their size. It's why, back on their chaos world, they could do a thing that sounds insane when you first hear it. They could run down prey. Not run it down in a sprint. Run it down over hours. Just keep going at a steady pace in the heat while faster animals overheated and had to stop, and the human just kept coming. Walking their prey to death across a burning landscape. Cooling themselves the whole way. That's what she was. That's what all of them are. That's the thing the soft skin hides. So while the Draven cooked and the Kesh floundered, Anya Reyes stood in the rising heat, sweating, cooling herself with a system a billion years in the making. And after a minute of letting it work, she picked her task back up and kept going. Tashin watched her from across the hall. I couldn't see his face from that angle, but I saw his posture, and his posture had changed. By the third hour, the cohort was gutted. 38 had started. By the third hour I counted, I was still logging mechanically. It was my job. 19 still on the floor. Half gone, carried off, withdrawn, pulled by the drones. The medical bay off the side of the hall was full. This was normal. Tashin had said as much. This configuration was a meat grinder. 19 at the third hour was actually high. Usually it was worse. The 19 who remained were the real ones. The genuinely tough. 2 of the crystalline who I'd underestimated, turned out their crystalline structure was weirdly stable across the thermal band, and their light pulse communication meant they could coordinate in the dark when the lights failed, which they now did, plunging the hall into blackness at random. A handful of Draven who'd figured out the heat management. A Kesh, just one. A lean, quiet one who'd clearly done something extraordinary to still be conscious. Some others. And Anya. The oxygen drops had started by then. Down to 6%, the manifest's floor, and this was the one I'd been most curious about because it was the one she'd been most casual about. Just altitude, sir. And I watched, and I understood what she'd meant. The other species fought the low oxygen. Their bodies panicked. Heart rates spiked, breathing went ragged and desperate, that animal terror of suffocation taking over and burning through their remaining reserves even faster. The lean Kesh nearly lost it here, went into a hyperventilating spiral, and I thought he was gone. And Anya walked over to him. In 6% oxygen, when every movement costs you, when the smart thing is to conserve every scrap of energy. She spent energy to cross the floor to a cadet who'd probably mocked her that morning, and she got low next to him, and she did something with her hands, slow and deliberate, showing him. Breathe slow, breathe deep. Don't fight it, don't panic. Panic burns oxygen you can't spare. In, hold, out, slow, she mimed it. She made him watch her chest. In, hold, out. And the Kesh, drowning in open air, latched onto the rhythm of this tiny alien's breathing and matched it, and slowly came back from the edge. She'd done it again. She was hemorrhaging her own reserves to keep other people on the floor. And I finally understood something about humans that the manifest could never have told me. It wasn't just that they were built for chaos. It was what the chaos had built into them. A species that evolved in constant emergency doesn't just develop tough bodies. It develops the other thing. The thing where, in the middle of your own suffering, you turn to the person next to you and you say, keep your hands moving. You're okay. Breathe with me. Because on a chaos world, alone you die, and together you might not. They'd learned it so deep it wasn't even a decision anymore. It was just what she did, dying a little herself and spending it on the others. Tashin was watching this too. And now I could see his face. The thing about Tashin's face, when I finally saw it clearly in the fourth hour, was that it wasn't awe. I'd expected awe. That's what I would have felt in his place. What I was feeling up on the mezzanine, honestly, this open-mouthed astonishment I kept having to remind myself to hide. But Tashin wasn't astonished. He was something quieter and heavier than that. He looked like a man doing sums he didn't want the answer to. Because here's what I think was going through his head, and I've had a lot of years to think about it. Vortashin had built his whole life around a certain understanding of the universe. The understanding was, some beings are hard, and most beings are soft, and the hard ones survive and the soft ones don't, and the entire purpose of a hall like 9 was to find the rare hard ones and burn away everyone else. He'd survived the hollow sieve on that understanding. He'd buried people on that understanding. It was the load-bearing wall of the man. And a soft creature had just walked into his hall and rearranged the whole thing. Not by being hard. That was the part he couldn't file away. She wasn't hard. She was soft, soft-skinned, small, shivering, sweating, visibly suffering the whole way through. If hardness was the thing that survived, she should have been the first one carried out. Instead, she was upright in the fourth hour of a configuration that had a 4% pass rate, and she was spending her own dwindling strength keeping the hard ones alive. Tashin's whole understanding of survival had a hole in it now, and he was the kind of man who, once he saw a hole, could not look away from it. The storm came in the fourth hour. I'd been dreading it, honestly, because the manifest had listed it and I'd read it and thought that's the one that finishes people. The others, cold, heat, thin air, those were steady states, terrible but steady. You could settle into them. The storm was chaos on top of chaos. Wind loads that shifted direction without warning. Precipitation that turned to ice on contact. Debris. Noise. The lights failing in the middle of it, so you were being battered by 100-kilometer wind in the dark, trying to complete a task with numb hands while the floor bucked under the gravity fluctuations. This is where the remaining cohort came apart. 19 had been on the floor at the third hour. The storm took them fast. It wasn't the cold or the air anymore, it was the unpredictability. The Kesh, the Draven, even the two steady Ith, every one of them was a specialist, and specialists need to know what they're specializing against. The storm gave them nothing to lock onto. Every time they adapted to a condition, the condition changed. Wind from the left, brace left, wind from the right. Find your footing, gravity drops to 0.4 and you're floating. Get used to floating, gravity slams to 2.6 and you're on your knees. I watched a magnificent Draven, one who'd handled everything else, simply stop. Not collapse, stop. He stood in the middle of the storm and I watched something behind his eyes just give up, not his body was fine, his mind couldn't take one more change it hadn't seen coming. He'd hit the thing Tashin had warned about at the very start. I've watched tougher than you break in the mind. The drone pulled him. He let it. By the middle of the fourth hour, there were 6 cadets left on the floor. And I want to tell you about those 6 because they mattered and because what happened next only makes sense if you understand that these were not weak beings. These were the best of a self-selected cohort of the toughest species in the sector. A lean Kesh, 2 Draven, the pair of Ith, and Anya Rays. They had by then stopped being competitors. That was the thing I didn't expect. Somewhere in the third hour, in the low oxygen, in the dark, it had stopped being a competition and become something else. They'd formed up, without discussing it, near as I could tell. The 2 Ith were pulsing light to map the dark for everyone. The Draven were bracing the load-bearing tasks that needed raw strength. The Kesh, recovered from his panic, was doing the fine sequence work that his kind were good at when they weren't dying. And in the center of it, moving between them, was Anya. She wasn't the strongest. She wasn't the toughest. In a straight contest of any single attribute, she'd have lost to every one of them. But she was the one who didn't specialize. She was the one who could be cold and hot and winded and battered and just keep adjusting, rerouting. And more than that, she was the one who understood in her bones, in a way none of the specialists did, that you don't survive chaos alone. She'd been born into a chaos world. She knew the shape of this. And the shape of it was, nobody gets out by themselves. So she'd made them into a unit. 6 survivors from 5 species who an hour ago had been strangers, and she'd turned them into something that could take the storm together. The lights failed completely at the peak of the storm. Total black. The hall's illumination just gone, and the wind screaming and the ice, and the floor pitching under the gravity swings, and somewhere in medical a monitor was chiming an alert, and I gripped the edge of the clerk's bench up on the dark mezzanine, because for a second I genuinely couldn't tell if the station itself was failing. And in the black I heard her voice. She was singing. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't a beautiful song. Her voice was ragged from the cold and the thin air, and she was clearly exhausted past anything I could imagine. But she was singing something, some rhythmic human thing, low and steady, and it cut through the storm just enough to be heard, and I realized what it was for. It was a marker, a point in the dark to orient on. As long as they could hear her, they knew where the center of the unit was. They knew which way was together. The 2 ith started poolsing in time with it. Light on the beat, then off, on off, a lighthouse in the storm keeping time with a human song. The Draven found the rhythm and steadied their bracing to it. The Kesh matched his breathing to it, the way she'd taught him hours ago. 6 beings from 5 worlds, in the total dark, in impossible conditions, holding together on the thread of a song from a planet none of them had ever seen. And Vortashen killed the storm. Just like that. He cut it, all of it, wind and ice and dark, the whole configuration dropping away at once, the hall lights snapping back to full, the gravity settling to a clean single standard. 90 minutes before the 6-hour mark. He ended it early. The 6 cadets stood there in the sudden calm, swaying, blinking, half destroyed, still in their formation, still oriented on the center where Anya stood with her ragged song dying in her throat. Tashin walked out onto the floor. Slowly, he stopped in front of them. And he did something I had never seen him do, not once, in the whole cycle I'd been logging his haul. He straightened up and he brought his fist to his chest, the Draven salute, the real one, the one they give to soldiers who have earned it and not to cadets who have merely passed, and he held it. Certification complete, he said. His voice was rough. All 6. This hall has never certified 6. It's certified 11 total across 41 runs. Today it's certified 6 in 1. He let his fist drop. You'll understand if I need a moment with that. Nobody moved. I think they were too wrecked to understand what he'd said. But then he turned to Anya. And the whole hall, the 6 of them, the medical staff at the edges, me frozen up in the dark. The whole hall understood that this was the part that mattered. Cadet Rays, he said. Sir, she could barely get it out. She was swaying on her feet. Someone that small, 6 hours of that, I don't know how she was standing at all. This morning you told me, these conditions were Earth on a Monday. I did, sir. I might have oversold how easy. No, he cut her off, but not harshly. You didn't oversell anything. That's what I need to say to you, and I need to say it in front of the cohort because they need to hear it too. He paused. I've run this hall for a long time. I've had one understanding of it the whole time, that survival is hardness, that the universe sorts beings into the hard and the soft, and the hall exists to find the hard ones. He looked at her. You are not hard, cadet. You're the softest thing that's ever walked onto this floor. You bled the whole way through. You shivered. You bled. And you certified while the hardest beings I've ever trained were carried out around you. He was quiet for a second. I've been wrong about what survival is for a long time. I thought it was about not breaking. But you broke 100 times in small ways, cold and heat and the air and the dark. You broke and you rebuilt, on the floor in real time, faster than I could throw new conditions at you. That's not hardness. Hardness shatters. I don't have a word for what that is. My language doesn't have one. Maybe yours does. Anya was quiet for a moment, and then, in a small, worn-out voice, she said, We call it getting through it, sir. And Tashin Vortashen, survivor of the hollow sieve, the man whose name people said quietly, Vortashen laughed. Once, short, disbelieving, like it had been startled out of him. Getting through it, he repeated. Of course you do. I have to tell you about the other 5, because this is the part that people forget when they tell the story, and it's the part I care about most. The 5 other survivors, the Kesh, the 2 Draven, the pair of Ith, they didn't resent her. You'd think they might. Their species pride, their specialist bodies, and here's this soft little creature getting the instructor's salute and a speech. Every reason to be bitter. Instead, the lean Kesh, the one who'd nearly panicked and died in the thin air, the one she taught to breathe, he crossed the floor to her. And he did the Kesh thing, the thing they almost never do for another species, the thing that costs them something. He lowered his crest. All the way. A Kesh lowering his crest to you is a Kesh telling you that you are in that moment above him, that your life mattered more than his pride. I mocked you this morning, he said. Before the run, I said you'd be the first one carried out. I know, Anya said. I heard you. You crossed the floor for me anyway. In the 6%, you spent your air on me. Yeah, well. She gave that small, tired smile again, the same one from the very start of the day, the one that had recalibrated the whole room. You looked like you needed it more than I did. The Kesh held his crest low a moment longer. Then he raised it, but slowly, deliberately, and gave a small nod, and it wasn't submission anymore, it was something better. It was equals. The 2 Draven came next. They didn't say much, Draven don't. But each of them put a hand flat on her shoulder, one after the other, this enormous heavy hand from a heavy world resting for a moment on this small soft creature. And that was the whole speech, and it said everything. The Ith pulsed something at her in their light language. She couldn't read it, obviously. But one of the medical staff who could translated it later and told me, and I've never forgotten it. They'd pulsed, you were the light when the lights failed. I logged them all out that day, 6 thumbprints, 6 certifications. I typed each one into the manifest and my hands weren't quite steady doing it. And then at the very end, when the hall was clearing, Vortashen looked up. Right at the mezzanine, right at me. I froze. I wasn't supposed to be watching. Records clerks log the manifest and mind their own business. We don't perch in the dark drinking in 6 hours of certification like it's the best show in the sector. I thought I was in trouble. He didn't look angry. He looked up at me and he said, loud enough to carry. You saw all that, clerk? Yes, sir, I managed. Good, he nodded slowly. Then you'll tell it right. People are going to hear about today, and most of them are going to turn it into a story about a human who was tougher than everyone. That's not what happened. You saw what happened. He gestured vaguely at the emptied floor, at the 6 who were filing out, at the small, soft creature at the center of them. Tell it right. Tell them she wasn't tougher. Tell them she was built for the storm, and she used what she was built for to keep everyone else standing. That's the story. Don't let them flatten it into the other thing. Yes, sir, I said. I'll tell it right. And I have. For years now, at supply depots and transit lounges, and once to a Kesh admiral. I've told it exactly the way he asked me to. Because he was right, people always want to make it the other story, the human was toughest story, and I stopped them. That's not what I saw. Here's what I saw. I saw a species that came up out of a world that never stopped trying to kill it, and instead of getting hard, instead of getting armor and plating and specializing into one perfect survivor's shape, they went the other way. They stayed soft. They stayed adaptable. They kept the ability to shiver and to sweat and to reroute and rebuild, to break in 100 small ways and knit back together on the floor faster than the conditions could change. And somewhere in that long emergency of a homeworld, they learned the other thing, the thing that isn't in any body at all, that you don't survive the storm by being the strongest thing in it. You survive by being the one who keeps everyone else standing, by singing in the dark so the others know where the center is. The galaxy spent a long time thinking Earth was a garden world, temperate, blue, unremarkable. It's not a garden, it's a forge, and it doesn't make hard things. It makes things that get through it. The last thing I remember from that day is Anya Reyes at the door of Hall 9, on her way out, barely upright, one of the big Draven letting her lean on his arm without either of them making a thing of it. And Tashin called after her, one more time. Cadet. She turned. Next cycle, advanced configuration. I run one a year. Certification rate is under 1%. It's worse than what you did today. Much worse. A pause. I'd like you in it. And Anya rays, soft, small, shivering, bleeding, 6 hours into the worst day of most beings' lives, looked at the man who'd survived the hollow sieve, and she smiled that same small smile one last time. "Sir," she said, "that just sounds like Earth on a Tuesday." And she walked out.